So the agenda today is pretty simple. We'll do some brief introductions and an obligatory definition slide. And then the meat of the presentation will be, I'll be talking about the capture part of focus stacking, and Rick Littlefield will be speaking about the processing side. We'll then together address some of the challenges and solutions, and then we'll take questions and hopefully provide good answers to them. So here is our obligatory definition slide. Focus stacking is shooting multiple frames while changing what is in focus and creating a final image that combines the sharp bits of each. So the output of focus stacking is a single image, but the input is many frames where each frame has a different point of focus. Introductions. So I am Doug Peterson. I am the third individual from the left there in the bottom left corner, and I work for Digital Transitions. Digital Transitions has two divisions and two locations. That is, the New York and LA offices both represent both divisions. Digital Transition is the overall entity, sells to photographers shooting product and still life and fashion and weddings and a variety of sort of commercial photographic applications. Digital Transitions Division of Cultural Heritage provides solutions for the cultural heritage market. That is, museums, libraries, and archives. And you can see here that we produce in that division a suite of capture equipment to scan books and film and manuscript materials and living specimens and long since past specimens and other artifacts of our cultural heritage. In that division, we provide many webinars, classes, and roundtables. You can see a few of them listed here. In the past, we have done webinars on Capture One CH, which provides automatic cropping and lab values and other tools for scanning and digitizing. We've done webinar on film scanning and on process control, and most recently on lighting. We've also taught many classes. Most recently, we've taught at IS&T's conference, 2 short courses last year and this year on Apple scripting and auto cropping. And we've also done roundtables. In past years, roundtables have been hosted on multispectral imaging, film scanning, and color. Today's webinar is on focus stacking. And our next webinar is up in the air. We'd love to hear from you. We're debating 2 topics. We'll probably get around to doing webinars on both of them, but one of them will be done in a few months, and the other one might be another solid 6 or 8 or 10 months before we do it. So we'd love to hear what you'd like to see first. Photogrammetry, which is a mathematical modeling based on taking many photos and building from that a 3D set of images that allow you to explore the topography and the structure and the detail and the 3-dimensionality of an object rather than just a 2D still photo. And automation, which refers to a suite of different tools like Apple scripting and SDKs, which would allow an institution or even an individual to streamline the process of capturing. Things like barcode readers, programming in automatic file naming or automatic processing, that sort of thing. If you have feelings one way or the other as to which of these is more urgently needed, please email info@dtdch.com. We would absolutely love to hear from you. Realistically, we probably expect to get 30 or 40 emails, not thousands, with such a vote. So if you have your voice put in, your voice will definitely be heard. In the future, we are also planning a course of classes, a whole suite of classes called the Digital Transitions Digitization Academy. That is currently being piloted with NARA in DC, the National Agricultural Records Administration, not National Agricultural, we also work with them, the National Administration of Records Archiving. National Archives of Record Administration, there we go. The cultural heritage world is full of acronyms. Sometimes it's easy to get them mixed up. After we've completed that pilot program, we will be opening up that class to broader institutions and different cities, so look forward to that. And we'll be hosting a roundtable in New York City in September with a to-be-determined topic. Again, suggestions for that topic, please email tes@digitaltransitions.com. Rick, I am handing the mic over to you, so to speak. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and tell us a little bit about Zerene.
Thank you, Doug. Well, I really like this slide that you put together. Rick Littlefield, CEO and head of everything. Small family-owned company is a polite way of saying one-man band. I'm the fellow who created Zerene Stacker and wrote it, and who answers all the support requests. If you write to support@zerenesystems.com, you get a personal reply from me. if you call the phone number on our website, and that's attached to the cell phone on my hip. We're physically located in Washington State. People often think Seattle, but actually we're in the Great Desert in central side of the state. Zerene Systems was something that I started after retirement from a career doing research and development at one of the national laboratories. I've had a lifelong interest in photographing small things, which I believe you will subsequently describe as tiny, think bugs. And I'm a frequent poster and part of the administration group at photomicrography.net, something like 16,000 postings out there over the years on topics ranging from the physics of diffraction up through composition of images.
Very good. We are very glad that Rick will be able to join us today as he is here in the U.S. and the opportunity to ask him questions about focus stacking software, I think, is amongst the best you're going to get. So again, if you have questions, please do email those during the webinar to aaw@digitaltransitions.com. We will definitely get to your questions. This morning's session, we had 5 excellent questions. I'd love to have 10 or 15 or 20. So let's start off by talking about use cases for focus stacking and when we should do something other than focus stacking. So first of all, there's many different ways you could break down when and how or why you might want to use focus stacking. But to me, the most obvious is size. There are use cases for focus stacking that are very, very tiny. Stuff in this case that is a couple millimeters long or smaller. We also have use cases that are small, things like this figurine that's approximately 4 centimeters tall, an inch and a half, and stuff that's big, so landscape, architecture, interiors, large-scale statues, interior installations, that sort of thing. The main thing you need to know up front is that tiny needs hundreds of frames for focus stacking, literally hundreds, sometimes thousands. Small stuff can often be done with many frames, maybe 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, but not normally hundreds or thousands. And big stuff also qualifies for focus stacking, but usually only calls for a few frames. There's a lot you can do near infinity with 2 or 3 or 4 frames for focus stacking. You'll have to excuse me for what seems like a little deviation from the topic, but I just take any opportunity I can to talk about this most amazing scientific fact, my very favorite sort of pet fact, and that is human beings, Homo sapiens, are closer in time to the T-Rex than the T-Rex was from the Stegosaurus. That is just incredible to me, and you think, well, how does that relate to focus stacking? Well, partly I just wanted to fit the fact in, but I think it's also a good analogy to how tiny and small are actually more different from each other than small and big are in the context of focus stacking. What I mean is that tiny stuff uses an entirely different technique. If you're going to shoot the eye of a fly or a microscope slide, you often employ camera movement or movement of the subject. So you move the camera and lens together toward the subject, or you move the subject toward the camera and lens. You don't refocus, you physically move things. That carries its own sort of can of worms. It requires its own specialized equipment. It is prone to its own set of pros and cons and trickinesses, whereas small and big stuff can both be done by just changing focus. It uses normal photographic equipment, the same kind of equipment you use to take a single shot, to shoot a landscape, or to shoot a small item in just one frame. It's the same equipment you're going to use to do focus stacking. Today's webinar is going to focus very, very heavily on small and big things. Where is that dividing line? What divides small from tiny? Well, obviously it's not one specific point, but a decent rule of thumb is that 1-to-1 is bigger, is small or big, and that 1-to-1 or higher is tiny. So what does 1-to-1 mean? 1-to-1 refers to the magnification. In other words, how big the sensor is, how big the projection onto the sensor is compared to how big the object is. 1-to-1 in this case means the same object size, 4 centimeters tall, was used to capture this elephant trinket, as was the size of the sensor, 4 centimeters tall. So if we fill the frame with a 4 centimeter object and the sensor is 4 centimeters tall, then we have a 1-to-1 ratio. Rick, how else would you describe 1-to-1 or this sort of distinguishing between small and tiny from your point of view?
Well, the classic break between close-up photography and macro photography was actually defined back in the late 1800s by the fellow who coined the word photomicrography. And he defined it as any subject that you would use a hand lens to take a close look at. The definition has mutated over the years, but roughly speaking, tiny is anything smaller than 1 inch in frame width, and small is anything larger than 1 inch. As you say, it's by no means a hard boundary, it's a spectrum, but about 1 inch wide is a good dividing line.
Fantastic. So now let's talk about what things we need in order to image small and large things. First, let's talk about requirements, absolute necessities. Static tripod, lighting, and subject. So we need a static tripod, one that's not wiggling around and almost surely not handheld. Now, obviously, every rule can be broken. It is possible to do focus stacking handheld, but for the purpose of today, talking about high-quality, efficacious focus stacking, we're going to stick with the line that you need a static tripod. You need a camera to be on a static tripod. You also need static or consistent lighting. And this means mostly that if we're using strobe, it can't be strobe that's wildly varying. You can buy some inexpensive strobes, and they're surprisingly inexpensive, but if you take 10 shots in a row, what you'll notice is they vary from one shot to the next, and that's not very useful in focus stacking. Again, you can imagine you can do it with inconsistent lighting, but it is more challenging. Likewise, if we were shooting an exterior scene and the light is changing due to clouds passing in front of the sun and then passing out of the sun, that is possible, but very challenging. We really want consistent static lighting. And finally, a static subject. It's possible to wiggle your way into doing focus stacking on a live specimen, but for today's purposes, we're going to assume the thing you're pointing the camera at is not moving. Control. We also need control of exposure, focus, and remote triggering. Control of exposure just means we need to have some way to manually adjust the shutter speed and aperture and have them stay the same throughout the focus stack. It's not a good thing during a focus stack for the aperture or shutter speed to be varying. We also need control of the focus. If we use, for instance, an iPhone, you'll find that you can't minutely move the focus forward and backwards in a way that is useful and consistent for focus stacking. So we're looking for a camera that can have manual control over the focus, moving it forward and backwards. And finally, remote triggering. Especially when we talk about small stuff as opposed to big stuff, it's really important you don't have to touch the camera every time you want to take a picture. If you're taking 30 or 50 or 100 images in a row for a focus stack, every time you touch the camera, you risk moving the camera. Even just a tiny, teeny bit is enough to throw off a focus stack. There is adaptations in software to try to minimize the effect of that. There are ways to try to work around it. But bottom line is you really need the ability to trigger the camera remotely. Now, that's a pretty broad set of requirements. You don't need a lot for focus stacking. You can get started with just about any manually controllable camera. But there are a lot of things that are nice, things you don't need, but which you definitely want. One of them is automation, automating the focus changing and the focus return. Focus changes here just refers to some cameras, and we'll be talking today about the Phase 1 XF. Some cameras allow you to automatically change the focus forward and backwards during a focus stack, to actually do the process of moving the focus, taking a picture, moving the focus, taking a picture, moving the focus, taking a picture automatically. It's also really nice, not needed, but nice, if at the end of that process the focus returns back to home, returns back to the initial point of focus, such that you can then repeat the process again without having to manually intervene. Not required, but very, very nice. Vibration monitoring and vibration recapture. This refers to the fact that, especially when we shoot smaller stuff, it's really nice for a camera to notice and avoid any vibration. And that can be vibration due to a mirror or a shutter. It could also be vibration due to the wind or due to you moving around on a wooden floor. You'll notice later today when I do live view, I'm working on a wooden floor, and if I just take a couple steps, even if I'm being fairly careful, that's enough to shake the camera during live view enough to see the actual vibration of it. So back to it, vibration, free capture. There's a variety of different ways to take a picture. There are cameras that have focal plane shutters and mirrors. There are cameras that have leaf shutters. There are cameras that have electronic shutters. There are cameras that have entirely sensor-based shutters. Bottom line is, you want a type of capture that has as little vibration as possible. And without getting too technical, basically put your finger on the camera and take a picture. If you notice vibration in your finger, it's probably too much vibration for really high quality focus stacking. You can work around it, you'll probably still get decent results, but if you want really great results, you want as close to vibration-free capture as possible. And then finally, high quality. And this is the thing we'll be harping on a lot today because it's not, there are some parts of this that are really intuitive and there are parts that are very unintuitive because they involve the math of focus stacking. The intuitive part is that it's garbage in, garbage out. If I take fuzzy, low quality color, low quality tonality, otherwise shoddy photos, and I stack them together, the result is going to be a shoddy final image. I want high quality inputs to get a high quality output. So you want a high quality sensor that has low noise and high color accuracy and high tonality, smooth tonality, and you want lenses that are sharp not just in the center but throughout the frame, and that have very nice very nice non-abrupt focus planes. The unintuitive part we'll get to later when we talk about how noise and dynamic range and tonality all affect whether or not the algorithms will be able to correctly identify detail or whether or not you'll get artifacts. The last one is computer. We don't need the latest and greatest computer, but it sure is nice. As a general rule of thumb, we want a computer that's got a decent amount of RAM, a decent amount of speed, made in the last few years, doesn't have to be this year's model, but made in the last few years. And the faster the computer, the faster the stack, the faster the processing itself will take place. Rick, you have some general ballparks or guidelines for people in this regard, correct?
Yes, Doug, I do, but the guidelines are pretty vague. Memory requirement for Zerene Stacker is approximately 100 megabytes of physical memory for each 1 megapixel in the image. For the 100 megapixel images coming off your camera, that translates to 10 gigabytes or more allocated to Zerene Stacker. That's easily within range of the 16 to 32 gigabyte systems that are commonly being sold these days. As for other features, processor speed is the most important. I'm currently using a machine that's about 2 years old. It has a single 6-core Intel processor in it, and it works fine. Back to you.
All right, so we've talked about the things that we need and the things that we want. Let's take a look very importantly at alternatives, because the fact of the matter is nobody loves focus stacking itself. You may love the result, you may love the end thing that you get out of it, but you're probably not going to love the actual process. This is, I can say this with some confidence because Rick, who has had a lifelong interest in photographing small things, even he doesn't love the actual process of focus stacking. He just loves that it allows him to create the results that he otherwise can't get. And that's really what we want to focus on when we talk about the alternatives. If one of these other 3 methods is enough to get the image you want, then you do not want to focus stack. Focus stacking is what you end up with if these 3 other alternatives are not viable for the image you want to create. So we can allow softness, we can stop down the lens, or we can do tilt swing. Let's take a look at each one of these. First of all, it's pretty obvious. The reason we don't want to do focus stacking is it's harder, it's more time consuming. Just taking a single shot and allowing it to be soft is both easier and faster than doing focus stacking. So let's take a look at each of these options. Allow softness. This just means use an aperture that's not going to get everything in focus. It's going to be very obvious the focus falls off. Put that focus somewhere in the image knowing that it's not going to go throughout the entire image, and just allow it to be. This is what we do in shallow depth of field portraits because it's a nice aesthetic, artistic, visual thing because we're not trying to show the entire face, we're just trying to create a nice image of someone. We're not trying to document their features or provide a iris scan ready image of them. We're just trying to take a nice pretty picture. Well, if you can allow softness in the image, by all means, go with that approach. Here you see the green on the right indicating the plane of focus. Notice the plane of focus is parallel to the sensor. That's how focus works with a normal lens without any movement. So here, this lines up with the sensor. And notice along the left, we have green, yellow, and red indicating good focus, okay focus, and then very poor focus. That green focus only extends just in front of the white pearl. You can also stop down the lens. If you go to f32, f64, f128 is even available on some older lenses, you will get semi-sharpness everywhere. And that's why this is yellow over on the right. It's homogeneously yellow, right? You get yellow from the front to the back. Likewise, on the left here in the image, you see the same level of homogeneous sharpness. But I'm going to quickly switch between the first slide and look here in the plane of focus versus here. And notice that where it's sharp, which is everywhere, it's not as sharp. It is only semi-sharp. But that is an option, and this is especially efficacious if we're creating low-res final outputs. If we're doing a thumbnail for a website, or an 800 by 600 pixel image for a website, or we're making a small print in a catalog, then stopping down very heavily is okay, because while the detail won't be as good for a large print, we're not making a large print. So if you can simply stop down, knowing that everything will get a little soft, that's okay, do it. The word that you're looking for here, if you're not familiar with this overall effect, is called diffraction. Diffraction is a physics concept. It is a sort of law of nature, a law of math and physics. And if you need to know why F32 is softer and not sharper than F8, then just Google around for diffraction-based softness, and you'll get a whole lot of articles that will explain that. The third alternative is tilt swing. And this can be done with a view camera. It can be done with some cameras with tilt swing lenses. The idea is that you move the lens and you actually tilt it forward. And what happens is the plane of the sensor, right here, that plane, the plane of the lens, and the plane of focus all line up. And so if you look at this image here compared to this image here, what you'll notice is that we have the same size of green strip. We haven't gotten more depth of field. It's the same strip of green, but that green field is now laying down in alignment with the object. So Alon, I'm going to have to take over your screen sharing again. Please, for all attendees, do not attempt to share your screen. So, moving on, we have the fact that the plane of focus aligns with the object, but notice here that while the silver main area of the earring is all within the green, that the white pearl extends vertically up away from it, and the little dangly extends down below it. And likewise, when we look at the image on the left, all the silver is marked as green, but the white pearl and the danglies are above and below the plane of focus. So it's a little bit unintuitive what happens when you tilt the lens forward. A lot of people think you just get more depth of field. You don't gain depth of field. You're simply using it in better alignment with the subject matter. So this can work, especially for very flat objects. For instance, shooting a piece of paper at an angle, a tilt swing lens could have the entire piece of paper in focus at 4, because again, your shallowness of depth of field doesn't matter if you align it perfectly with a very flat subject. But a lot of the time, as in this image, tilt swing is not by itself enough. And so focus stacking is the final option. It is the last resort, so to speak. I don't want to make it sound too dramatic, because it's not that hard to do, but it's the thing that we do when we can't otherwise get an image sharp everywhere we want it to be sharp. We take multiple pictures, as you can see with this animation. Each individual picture has the same shallow depth of field as taking a single shot, but by stacking them together in the software, we create one image where it's sharp everywhere. So comparing these again in summary, allowing softness provides sharpness but only in a sliver. Stopping down the lens to f64 or f128 gives you the same level of sharpness everywhere, it's just that level of sharpness is only semi-sharp. A tilt swing lens allows you to be sharp along a plane, and that plane can be better aligned with your subject, but it's still only a plane and it's still only a shallow depth of field, and so something that extends above or below will be soft. And focus stacking gives you sharpness everywhere at the additional cost of it being a little bit more time consuming. Anything more to say about this, Rick? All right, sounds like no.
Yeah, sorry about that. I neglected to unmute my hard phone here. Yeah,
very good. Anything
your
to add to
answer
that
was very good.
Very good. So let's talk about capture workflow. How do we get from A to Z? How do we actually execute a focus stack? Well, the first thing I want to emphasize is that when you're doing a focus stack, you should do all the things you'd normally do to make a normal good picture. That is, the angle, the framing, the lighting, the subject preparation all still matter. It's very important to remember this because when you get into really technical photography, especially when you're first learning it and it's still the thing that's taking up most of your mental energy is to remember how to do a focus stack, it's easy to forget the basics. It's easy to make an ugly image, one that is not otherwise meeting your goals, whether it's a product photographer making sure that the image still looks pretty, or whether it's a cultural heritage museum photographer making sure that the image helps visually to explain the object to someone who's not seen it before. So, for instance, selecting an angle in which the image is most visually comprehensible. It's still important to do all the basic stuff. So the first thing to do for a focus stack is just set up a standard shot. Then we need to get involved in the focus stacking particulars. In specific, we need to find the front and back point of focus. There's a lot of different ways to do this, and depending on which camera you're using, one of them may be better than others. However we do it, we're going to find the front and we're going to find the rear. So some of those methods include live view, and when we do live view later today as a demonstration, you'll notice we can use a focus meter, which allows us to numerically analyze the focus to give us sort of a objective analysis of whether or not we're in focus. And of course, we can do visual review at 100%, which is a fancy way of saying we could just look at the live view and say, does it look sharp? Another method is to use autofocus. This is more useful if we're talking about interiors, architecture, landscape, or that sort of thing. You can simply point the camera at the near ground, the foreground object, and focus on it, and note where it focuses. You then focus on the background and note where it focuses. And then finally, if all else fails, we can do guess and check, which basically just means taking a variety of pictures, trying to focus on the foreground, and noting which one of them is correct and where you're focused when it's correct. It might be 3 feet, it might be 3 inches, whatever that number is, that's your near point of focus. So we're going to find the front, we're going to find the rear, and then we're going to determine how many shots are necessary to stack the image together. Basically, if you can imagine, on the right side here, you see the focus map sort of showing how much of the object is in focus each frame. If the overlap isn't there, if each frame, if there's parts of the object that aren't in focus in any of the frames, then it won't be in focus in the final frame. You are looking for something like 1/3 overlap. There's no hard and fast rule. You don't need to have exactly 0.3333. What you're looking here for is you need to have some overlap, but not way too much. So, Rick, can you tell us a little bit about what happens, and don't forget to unmute yourself, what happens if there is insufficient overlap?
If there is not enough overlap, well, clearly if there's no overlap at all, there will be little gaps between the in-focus regions. If there's not enough overlap, normally everything will be still okay, but in particularly challenging cases, the software may not be able to decide exactly when to switch from one frame to another, so you can still end up with that little bit of what we call focus banding, areas of softness between sharp regions.
And Rick, if we have way too much overlap, what happens?
If you have way too much, there's usually no impact on the final image. You'll just spend more computer time processing to get good stuff.
Very good. So you can imagine if a shot could have been done with 10 shots, and instead we take 100, right, and we only have we have 90% overlap, we only have 10% new each time we take a picture, we're just wasting a lot of our time. And we're also sort of wearing down all the components that move when you take a picture. It's not disastrous, but we want to aim for 1/3. Once we have 1/3, adding more is not helpful. So some methods to establish how many shots we want to take include math. Now, you can do a mathematical sort of derivation of how much at a given focus distance with a given sensor size, with a given pixel size, with a given enlargement size, how much of an object is going to be in focus. I would, as you see here, scratch that off your list. Mostly because the other methods are both more intuitive and they're more tangible, right? The whole point here is to see where the visual sharpness overlaps. Well, instead of doing that mathematically, let's do that visually. If the goal is to visually analyze it, let's analyze it visually. So another method is previous experience, and I mostly point this out first because it is the method you'll use the most frequently, especially in the context of a high-volume workflow. If you're a commercial jewelry photographer and you shoot 1,000 rings a day or even 10 rings a day, for 9 of those rings or 999 of those rings, you will not be redoing this process. If the rings are similarly sized and you place them in the same place in the frame, you will be able to repeat the focus stack without reestablishing the front, rear, and number of shots. So a possible method of establishing number of shots is simply to know what you've previously used in the situation. If it's the first time you've approached the situation, on the right side there you see the focus mask. That's a pretty good way to ballpark it. I wouldn't make my very final decision on that, but it's a really useful way to know if you're way too high or way too low. If you take 5 shots and the focus mask shows that there are huge gaps between the focus masks, you probably need more. And likewise, if you advance through 100 shots, you notice the focus mask barely moves each shot, you're probably way too high. You can also see it makes a very sort of compelling visual to see that you're going from front to back. Finally, inspection 100%. This is probably the most powerful and the one that you're going to use most often to make a final determination. And that is simply to place a guide in one image based on where you think it's no longer sharp. In Capture One, you can do that with Command G and just drag the guide. And visually inspect that the next image is still sharp where the previous image was falling off in sharpness. So here you can see on the image on the left, S is very, very sharp, A is okay, but you can see it's falling off in sharpness somewhere around the middle of the A. On the right image, the T and N are very sharp, but you can see the focus is falling off around A. So if this image has any focus overlap at all, it's very minimal. We definitely do not have the 1/3 overlap we're looking for. So in this example on screen, we don't have enough overlap. If you're squinting to try to see that, again, I recommend using View Full Screen and availing yourself of the sort of arrow up to the right and arrow down to the left, allowing you to maximize the screen share in your monitor. So after we've determined the number of shots, it's time to actually take the picture. We'll do the capture sequence. Capture sequence is basically take a picture, move the focus, take a picture, move the focus, take a picture, move the focus, from the front to the back with the number of shots you determined you need. If you're doing this manually, you would literally turn the lens, or if you have a button for focus, push the button for focus, take a picture, and repeat. So if you're doing that for 50 shots, rotate the lens, take the picture, rotate the lens, take the picture, rotate the lens 50 times. If you have an automatic, this is why I said it was very nice to have automatic focus advancement, you would simply initiate the capture sequence and the computer or the camera will move the focus and take the picture as needed. After you've made the capture, it's a good time to double check and evaluate the image. Evaluate that you have the front is sharp, the back is sharp, and that there's enough overlap. This is sort of your double check stage. Adjust as needed, and then here's the real coup de grace. Once you've done all that work, which nobody here would tell you is not a decent amount of work, it will take you several minutes at best, even after you've become experienced. After you've done that, though, if you have another object of a similar size, if you've collated your job, collating meaning sort of collecting together similarly sized objects at once, if you've done that, you can then drop in another object and repeat, and another object and repeat. And especially if the camera or the computer can automate that process for you, as some cameras and computers and software can, you would simply drop another object in and initiate the capture sequence, have a sip of coffee, put the next object in, initiate the capture sequence, have another sip of coffee, and you can do 10 or 20 like this without any manual intervention. So it's time to demonstrate this. This is hopefully the moment you all have been waiting for, to actually see this take place in real time. So first I want to show you what we're demoing on, because my webcam is going to be pointed down at the camera and not from the sort of overall of the scene. I want you to see what we're looking at. This is our station here in New York. I took this picture a little bit before the meeting started, showing the camera pointing at the train. What you'll notice here is a variety of equipment that we're using that I'm going to step you through. The first is the Phase 1 XF. We're showing the Phase 1 XF in this capacity because the Phase 1 XF has focus stacking built into the body. That is, it is able to record a front, a back, a number of shots, and it is able to automatically control the camera to go from the front to the back in that number of shots. The DT Atom is the physical surface on which we are placing the train. DT Atom is a versatile copy stand that we produce here in the U.S., sell a lot to museums, libraries, and archives. You can see here it shoots flat manuscripts and books. You can also shoot RC glossy prints. We have a magnetic top that you can use neodite magnets to hold down things that would otherwise bend up, for instance, RC glossy prints or bendy Bowie maps. You can also take one of the lights off of the stand and place it underneath, place a transmissive top on top and shoot glass plate negatives or other transmissive materials such as 35mm slides, strip film, 4x5 film, etc. And you can also place both lights underneath and place our foldable, storable, collapsible sweep. And the sweep is what we'll be using today. The sweep allows you to shine light through the white plexiglass, so the background and the under surface are both pure white. We'll also be using the IQ3 100 megapixel. This is a back which produces an extraordinarily clean, high accuracy color, high tonal accuracy, smooth tonality, and very, very low noise image. Most cameras today, most modern, decently spec'd cameras shoot fairly low in noise. When we talk about focus stacking benefits from extraordinarily low noise, and very low noise versus extraordinarily low noise is actually a difference that matters in focus stacking. It does help you isolate areas of detail versus areas that are just out of focus. We also are here using the ProPhoto D4 strobes and the DT photon lights. The DT photon lights are the ones that come with the DT Atom. They are LEDs with a CRI of 98, a CQS of 98, a million-hour runtime, and very low temperature runtime. Oh, and the ProPhoto D4s we're using here because they are very consistent. If you take 1,000 shots in a row and measure the output, it is very, very, very tightly and consistently controlled. All right, so remember the very first step in focus stacking is just composing, lighting, and arranging a otherwise nice-looking image. To save you guys some time waiting around for me to do things that aren't related to this webinar, like picking a good point of view and establishing good lighting, I've already done that here, so my setup is already pretty decent as far as the look of the setup that I've made. So we're going to go ahead and skip straight to the establishing the front and back point of focus. To do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch the aperture from f9 to wide open. When we judge focus, we want to judge focus when possible wide open. That allows us to be as scrutinous or careful about it as possible. I'm going to launch live view, and I'm going to place a focus meter on the front of the train. So I'm going to zoom in, that's the hand tool, and double click. I'm going to place a focus meter here at the front edge of the train, and this is actually unintuitive that it is so difficult to know exactly what is the frontmost part of a subject. So I've looked from the top down. I know exactly what protrudes towards the camera the most, looking for any sort of small extraneous elements that I may not have otherwise noticed. I'll now use the remote focus control in Capture One here. When I'm getting pretty close, I'll switch from large changes to small changes. And notice that when I go too far, the focus meter received back from its high water mark, indicating that I'm not as good as I used to be. Now, the intuitive thing to do would be to set this focus right at the perfect mark. And Rick, tell me a little bit about why I don't want to be exactly right in this regard.
Well, because you don't want to pay the penalty of shooting a bunch of frames, running them through the processing, and then realizing that, oh dear, something slipped a little bit in your setup and you missed the most farther foreground frame. Just, it looks awful, and there's no way to fix it except to go back and shoot the whole stack. It's much less painful and safer to just shoot a couple of extra frames to the front and back.
So in this case, I correctly focused the front, and then I gave it one full click closer to me. So I know for sure the front of the train is going to be in focus because I'm going to start the focus stack a couple millimeters ahead. Now think about this. We're viewing a very highly magnified view of this train, but in reality, we're talking about literally a millimeter or two of focus. So when we say a little bit of wiggle room, a full click here with 3 arrows is only moving the effective focus by a millimeter or two. That means if I sneeze and push this train back a nudge, if I don't do this, I'd be out of focus. With that extra millimeter or two of wiggle room, I've left myself a little bit of leeway. So I've now established a point of focus. How do I save that? In Capture One, in the Phase 1 XF, if you notice where my finger is here, I'm going to push down on the silver button next to the macro flower. That's going to save my current focus point as the closest of the 2 points, the closer point, the near point. I'm now going to zoom out. H for hand cursor, double click. I'm going to go to the back of the train and double click, grab my focus tool, and roughly place it down there, and then again use my, going the wrong direction. readjust exactly where I'm focusing. And there we go. So here you can see the back point is perfectly in focus. And again, I'm going to elect to go a little bit further than that point. So now that I have that point, I'm going to save that here under the mountain icon. Notice right now the triggering, which is the circle with the shutter, that sort of indicates begin sequence, is red. That's because I've not yet entered both a front and a back, and it needs both variables. When I push here on the landscape icon, I'll now have the option to begin the focus stack as desired. The number of frames is controlled here in the bottom left. I can dial up or down. I'm going to use the previous experience method here. I know that I'm going to need about 40 frames. Okay. So now I have a front and a back point of focus and a number of frames, and we'll also look in Capture One at how we can evaluate and double check that the number of frames is correct. So we won't be cheating, don't worry. I'm now going to initiate the capture sequence here with the shutter release button. And I have made a small error here, so I will abort the sequence. I did neglect to stop the lens back down after my testing of the focus points. So I will reinitiate with F8. Here we can see the sequence coming in. I'm going to turn on the focus mask. You can do that with the icon in the top right corner or under Show Focus Mask. Now watch this focus mask as it processes forward on the object. Showing us that the focus is moving forward and forward and forward on the object. Now, if you want to do this in real time with 100 megapixel files, this is one of those cases where you would need a fast computer. This is a Mac Pro, 6-core Mac Pro. It is not the top spec Mac Pro made, but it is pretty far up there, and that allows me to see the focus mask in real time. I can also simply capture all of them, wait for the focus mask to build, and then switch between them after the capture point has already occurred, right? So it is an advantageous element of having a fast computer that I get to sort of see the sausage being made. I get to see here the focus mask proceeding forward. I'm now manually advancing the images backwards, so I can see here the focus mask trailing down. Now the focus mask is a contrast detector, so think about this. The white plexiglass is definitely in focus somewhere in this image, but the white plexiglass is smooth and featureless and doesn't have contrast even when it's in focus. So here I've done a nice job of getting from front to back. So as far as checking things go, I would use the focus mask initially to just check to make sure that my focus mask has proceeded all the way forward. I would then zoom to 100%, and I'd confirm that there's at least one image after the image in which I believe the front of the object is fully in focus. So right here is where I would say peak focus, right? On this image is peak focus for the frontmost of the object. And from this point, I still have 1, 2, 3, 4 images in excess, the last of which is clearly front focus. I can probably go ahead and delete this one and leave just 1 or 2 excess. Looking in the back of the train, I go to the very beginning of the session, and notice there were a few images here that were shot before I didn't stop down the lens. So I could delete them, or I can take advantage of a new tool in Capture One called Sequence ID Filtering. So when I shot that focus stack on the XF, it embedded metadata that said these 50 images are all related to each other. They're part of one sequence. So this was the initial sequence that I aborted because I forgot to stop down the lens. And here is the sequence I just captured. So this, therefore, is the first image of that sequence. I go to the back of the train. I'm looking for at least one image prior to the image that is perfectly in focus. So right here, I would say I'm going to zoom in here to 400% to make it really easy to see no matter how big this is on your monitor. That image has the rearmost of the train perfectly in focus. From that point, there is still 3 more images assuring me 100% that I have had every point of the train in focus in at least one image. So again, my front is front enough, my back is back enough. Let's take a look to see if there's enough overlap. I'm going to pick out an area of the image with some continuous, uninterrupted detail to make it easy on myself. back a couple. So take a look at this image. We can see that we're in focus from roughly here to there. Right now I'm going to look at a specific row of these. I'm going to look at this very first row and say that the point of focus ends right around here. I want the next image to still be sharp at that point. Otherwise, I don't have any overlap. When I look, that next image is still in sharp focus at that point. If it wasn't, I would need to increase the number of images to assure that I had overlap. If it was way too much, in other words, between those two images, basically nothing changed, I could actually decrease the number of shots. And again, if I wanted to do that, for instance, to decrease the number of shots based on changing aperture, I could change the aperture to, say, f11, increase my light to compensate. I would then focus stack with just, say, 35 images. I'd be able to repeat that capture for 35 captures. Right now I'm filtering based on previous sequence down here in the bottom left. I would change my filter to see the new images coming in. And I could again watch the focus mask as it processes forward on the object. To save some time here, I will abort this sequence. And let's take a look at one last thing we can do with sequence IDs, because we're basically ready now to process out images, which would place us in a good position for Rick's presentation on processing and stacking the images together. So right here I have 49 images related to each other. These are all focus stacks from one specific focus stack. I could process these out to a specific folder, but imagine for me that you have 10 more trains. So I place a different train in there, I initiate another capture sequence, and I now want to process out both sets of trains without having to select the first train and label it train 1 and process it to a folder called train 1, and then select train 2 and process it with the name train 2 to a folder named train 2. Instead, I could select everything in this folder, all images, select all, and in the process tab, I could elect to process segmenting out the output to a subfolder based on the sequence ID. That would mean that each of these images goes into a folder based on the sequence ID of what it belongs to. If I had 20 rings, each one of which had 50 shots, I would then therefore have 1,000 images. If I processed out using this subfolder option of sequence ID, I'd end up with the appropriate 20 rings, each in its own folder, each containing 50 images. So that is a sort of walkthrough of focus stacking on the XF. Focus stacking on the XF specifically adheres to whatever you've done in the main mode. So if, for instance, I'm working out in the field, I can turn vibration avoidance mode on that monitors the vibration shown in the seismograph. The seismograph, which is currently hidden, which I will share on here. So I can show the seismograph and it will actually avoid vibration based on that seismograph and only take the pictures when there isn't vibration taking place. So when the wind isn't blowing it, or when I'm not touching the camera, or when the tripod legs aren't being bumped or rattled by a passing train or whatever. Rick, any things to add to the capture part of this before we move on to the processing element?
I do not have anything to add except that that seismograph feature is very cool. I've not seen that before on any device.
It is surprising how once you see it, it's very intuitive and you kind of wonder why everybody doesn't have it. But it is not a feature, I agree, it's not a feature I have seen on any other camera. It's possible it's on camera. I don't know every camera in the world, but certainly it's not a common feature.
How to assemble the slices into a finished image. Oh, Doug, the slide still says which software. Doug and I had talked about this earlier. And what is shown here are the two main specialist focus stacking products, Zerene Stacker on the left, Helicon Focus in the center, and a third possibility, Photoshop, on the right. Photoshop has had focus stacking capability built into it from, I think, CS3 forward. It's a pretty basic capability without any controls. If you have Photoshop, give it a shot. If you love what it does, great. If you don't, move on to one or both of the other specialty products. Helicon Focus is the one that has been around for the longest. They entered the marketplace in 2004. I used them at that time to do the kind of work that I wanted. As I moved into more and more challenging, especially high magnification stacks with hundreds of frames, it became challenging to get the results that I wanted, and so I ended up writing Zerene Stacker essentially for my own use. Zerene Stacker entered the marketplace in 2009, about 5 years later, and has caught on pretty well. As far as I can tell by seeing what's posted on the internet, there are more Flickr posts tagged with Zerene Stacker and more Nikon Small World awards that have been won using Zerene Stacker than all of the other focus stacking products combined, which I personally find very gratifying. I wrote Zerene Stacker intending it to support my own photography, but now thousands of other people are using it to do theirs, and they're generating much nicer stuff than I ever could by myself. So that's a wonderful thing. Doug will probably point out at some point that these products are not ferociously expensive, and if you have the opportunity, it is certainly a good thing to have both of them. There are some
I could not possibly agree with that more. I feel like photographers are a little allergic to paying for software and all too ready to pay for hardware, when both of them obviously can contribute to solving the problems you have as a photographer or to meet the challenges you have as a photographer. But the bottom line is that if you're going to shoot with even a half-decent small format, even micro 4/3 macro lens, buying both software packages is likely to be less than half, maybe 10 or 20% of the cost of the lens, let alone the rest of the camera system, tripod, lighting, studio, etc. You're going to spend, especially in focus stacking, you're going to spend at least half of your total time in the software. And I am the very first to say, Rick has been very generous to be part of this webinar and to answer a lot of questions for me. I love his software. There are times where I think Helicon Focus does a better job. There are also many times where I feel like Zerene does a better job than Helicon. But the point is, there are times where either one of them is the better tool. And given the relatively small price for each of them, if you have any serious interest in focus stacking, if you're going to be spending any serious amount of time in here, even a few hours a day, a few days a month, you are surely best served by just sucking it up and buying both, because you will be able to explore both. You'll be able to see if a specific stack that is having problems in one works better in another. You'll be able to compare and contrast them for important stacks before you make large prints or before you upload them to important competition or to a client. It only makes sense. And yeah, Photoshop, the tool in Photoshop is really just not very good.
Okay, good summary. So I think this next slide is just your basic accolade from the community. Thank you for inserting the slide, Doug. But this is one man's opinion, Jonathan Brecko and colleagues, offering that Zerene Stacker gives the user more possibilities. Okay, they're entitled to their opinion. I would happen to agree with them, but the point is that point remains that both products are excellent for doing focus stacking, and if you have an opportunity to get both, by all means do that. So, workflow for processing. Drag files in, and all of these products offer some sort of a menu entry for file add files with an embedded internal file navigator, but I personally find it much more convenient to just use the operating system's file navigator, Finder on Mac, Windows Explorer on Windows, because you get a much broader opportunity to see thumbnails and so forth, and just drag them in. In Zerene Stacker, only JPEGs and TIFFs are accepted, not RAWs. The reason for that is that the focus stacking process is fundamentally incompatible with the actual information that is in a RAW file. So under the covers, it's always necessary to do a conversion from RAW, which has one RGB color per photo site, per pixel position. It's always necessary to convert that to something like a TIFF, which is RGB at each pixel position. In Helicon Focus, you can input raw files, but it'll just do the conversion behind the scenes where you can't see it happening and you don't necessarily have any control over it. In Zerene Stacker, I just say, look, there are specialty products for doing that raw conversion much better than I can. The best thing to do is to get one of those, figure out how to use it well, and optimize the raw conversion parameters so as to do the best job for the particular combination of equipment, subjects, illumination, and so forth that you happen to have. After you get your files into the product, you have to select some options and decide how to process it. In Zerene Stacker, and for that matter in Helicon Focus, there are two fundamentally different processing methods. There is a so-called pyramid method, which in Zerene Stacker is called Pmax. In Helicon Focus, it's called method C. Pmax, the pyramid methods, in both of them, are characterized by being really easy to use. They have no learning curve because they have no parameters to set. You just tell the software to run this method and it takes care of everything. These methods also have the advantage that they are good with tricky overlaps, which actually means complicated geometry. If you have small bits of the subject sitting in front of other small bits of the subject so that it occludes them, then the pyramid methods are much likely to do an acceptable job of handling that than the depth map methods are. On the downside, the pyramid methods have this habit of building up noise and altering colors and contrasts. So these methods are best for complex, busy subjects. The second major method, so-called depth map methods, in Zerene Stacker called DMAP, in Helicon Focus called method B. Well, these have advantages and disadvantages that are complementary to the pyramid methods. The depth map methods have several controls that you do have to learn in order to generate best results from those, and they're not as good at handling complex geometry. On the other hand, they're completely faithful to the pixel values of the original source images. They do not build up noise, they do not alter colors and contrasts. Best for, it says here, accurate tone and color. What it really means is faithful tone and color, meaning what comes out of the software is exactly the same as what went into the software. Whether that is accurate in a photometric sense depends on how well you set up the illumination and camera settings and color balance and so forth beforehand. If you are using any of the depth map methods, there are a couple of options that you need to understand about. One of them is the so-called radius. All of these depth map methods work by looking in small neighborhoods of the image to see how much contrast there is. It's an awful lot like the focus meter capability, but applied to regions that are only a few pixels across. The size of those regions turns out to matter, and both Helicon Focus and Zerene Stacker provide a way to set the size of those regions with what's called this radius number. And the meanings in those two software packages are quite similar. Zerene Stacker also includes another control called contrast threshold, which allows you, the user, to provide the software with human judgment about where in the image there actually exists focus detail that is worth preserving. If you have a complex subject and you've focus stacked the entire depth from front to back, then this is not necessarily something that you need to worry about. If you have out-of-focus backgrounds or portions of the scene that don't have any focus detail in the first place, then you can use the contrast threshold selector to generate the best possible result out of that. That type of control is missing from Helicon, so if you can get the good result using just the radius, that's great. Otherwise, you'll have to do perhaps a bit more retouching in Helicon. Evaluate. Well, this, as Doug said, is just a matter of looking at the image and seeing where the automatic processing of the software has done a good job versus places where it has introduced what we happily call artifacts. More pessimistic people would refer to them as errors, the software generated pixel values that are not the same as what a human painter would do with the same data. Do the evaluation, and if you see areas where the automatic processing did not do what you like, then you have the option to retouch. Retouching can be either from the original source imagery, or very commonly, it works out better to retouch from the output of one method into the output of another method. In Zerene Stacker, it is very common to run both PMAX and DMAP, and then use the retouching tool to retouch from one to the other so as to get the best results.
So Rick, I want to ask a sort of ignorant outsider question in that regard. If you go back a couple of slides and we're comparing these formulas, we have two different methods. Why is it that we have to choose? Why isn't there some master formula to rule them all that does the best of both with no human intervention and no retouching and always works for everything?
Because we have not figured out how to write that method yet. The process, well, the desirable result that seems like we all have in mind, certainly I do, is what I would like to come out of the focus stacking process corresponds to what a pinhole camera would give if the pinhole camera could somehow manage to be immune from the physics of diffraction. That is, it would be shot through an aperture with essentially zero width, but would nonetheless be sharp everywhere. That would be a wonderful thing. Unfortunately, there is such a thing as physics of diffraction, and those laws say that as you make the aperture small, the image gets fuzzy. You alluded to that earlier with loss of sharpness if you stop down too far. With a real aperture, with one wide enough to give a sharp image, unfortunately, the in-focus information that the lens sees is very often contaminated by out-of-focus information from nearby areas of the scene. Teasing apart what is real and what is contaminated is a very hard problem that essentially requires reconstructing a model of what the entire 3D object looked like and then doing something like computer-generated imagery to turn that back into what the camera would have seen in this mythical case. A human has enough intelligence to kind of sort of do that if you give them forever. If you take a stack of 50 images captured with a real camera, give it to an artist, and say, make me a painting of what this thing would look like, the artist can do that given long enough. I have hopes that eventually we software developers will figure out how to mimic that human, except do it a lot faster, but we're not there yet. Maybe in 10 years.
That's a great explanation. So I guess right now, if it's not working for a specific, especially more complicated subject matter like the one that's on screen, our options are to retouch.
Yes, there are other options, I believe, that appear on other slides that involve stopping down farther. One of my recommendations actually is stop down as far as you can while still getting the sharpness that you need. In some cases, that means setting your lens at its absolutely sharpest aperture, but in a lot of cases, it means stopping down to a significantly smaller aperture that's just barely sharp enough, because that will simultaneously minimize your processing time and give you fewer artifacts and give you fewer source frames that you might have to reach back to carry out the retouching. So small apertures are good. The example that's shown on screen here is a small bit, we're actually zoomed into 300%, of a geranium plant where we are looking past the petal, past some leaves, at some fine texture on, I think, a rock or a stem in the background. And the key point about this is that I, as a human, in looking at this image, have recognized that there's this funny halo in here. That dark band is not actually present on the tan object. That dark band, I think, is the remnants of a cloud shadow that went over and made one particular frame unusually dark compared to the others. This thing we're looking at is, in general, a DMAP output. This is the depth map method. And so that dark frame, which was not fully compensated by brightness correction in the software, that dark frame has resulted in both this dark band, and there's also, in general, a loss of detail halo right around in here. We see that. We want to be able to fix it. We have to fix it by reaching back to some other source which doesn't have it. It turns out that a good source for doing that is the PMAX output. I'm going to go back one frame and show you this is a single source frame. It happens to be the source frame in which the petals were sharply focused. Obviously the leaves are not, and that stem in the background is not. In the PMAX method, which we will see next, PMAX has done a great job of sorting out how the detail distributes across those various depth planes. So we have sharp hairs of this background stem right up to the edge of this sharp leaf, even though, harking back to the original source images, we would see that either the leaf was horribly out of focus or the stem was horribly out of focus. So PMAX has got the transitions good, yet has had to make a correction as well to the overall brightness. So if you notice on the right, the green leaf is brighter in the DMAP output than it is in the PMAX output. The brighter version in the DMAP output is, again, perfectly faithful to the original source images. PMAX has altered that in order to get the geometry right. But there is, in Zerene Stacker, a retouching brush that understands how to handle that situation very well. It is sort of an adaptive hardness brush. If you're familiar with the hardness control in Photoshop, ranging from 0 to 100%, that's a good model, but it's not enough. What the brush does in Zerene Stacker is that for fine detail, it acts like the brush is hard, so it copies fine detail right out to the edge of the indicator circle. But in areas where there's no fine detail, like down in here, it will soften itself up so that you don't get an artificial line because you're copying from a dark region to a bright region. Let me show you what that does. We're positioned here just ready to do a press and drag to retouch from the left to the right. There's the result of that press and drag. Let me go back and show it to you without that. So here we are back where we're seeing the artifact on the right. We're seeing lots of crisp detail properly handled for foreground, background, midground on the left. And now click. After the press and drag, we have the proper handling of the details and quite acceptable handling of the slight differences in brightness that the two methods had. So that form of retouching from one output to another is the one that I personally use the most often, and that's the one I recommend that people practice until they're good at it. Reaching back to the original source images is always an option, but gee, you know, there are always a lot more original source images than there are other outputs. So that's likely to be a more tedious job. Once you've completed all of your retouching, you just commit that retouching in Zerene Stacker. That generates a new image that happens to have the name retouched added to the end of it. And then you're going to save that. You can save outputs as either JPEG or TIFF, 8 or 16-bit. We always recommend that for best quality, you save as 16-bit TIFF. And if you want, you can also save the project. Project means not just the images that were constructed by the automatic methods and optionally by the retouching, but in addition, it saves all of the alignment information so that you can come back tomorrow and do a little bit more retouching to take care of that dust spot that you didn't notice without having to repeat the computation of aligning things. The need for that may become more apparent in just a moment. Demo time, let's see. So this is my cue to open up a copy of Zerene Stacker and also to open up a Windows Explorer, which is showing images very much like the ones that Doug shot a few minutes ago. These were shot yesterday and sent to me. And because I knew we were going to be short on time, I reduced them to 50% resolution. And I'm now going to just select 1 out of 3 of those images and pass those over to Zerene Stacker. So inside Zerene Stacker, let me blow that up so it's easier to see, we now have all of the source imagery that we started with. and I can scroll quickly through those. You can see focus here on the front of the train, in the middle of the train, on the back of the train, and you'll probably notice as I do that, that the train also appears to change size. Changing size happens almost all the time, no matter how you change focus. Newbies to focus stacking almost always look at that and say, uh-oh, my magnification has changed. Is that not going to be a problem? And the answer is no. Because it happens all the time, all of the products know how to handle it very well. So inside Zerene Stacker, there are some options about how to do the alignment. The default is to correct for all sorts of shifts and scales and rotations. Because Doug's stack was shot on a tripod, I think we don't need to correct for rotation, but it's probably a good idea to leave all the rest of that stuff checked. So we'll just OK that, and then we'll say align and stack all Bmax. The first step happened a little bit too fast for you to notice, but Zerene Stacker went through, compared the first frame with the last frame, and picked the one that had the narrower field of view. That's the one it decided to start processing with. In this case, the narrowest field of view happens to be the last one that Doug shot, and so it has reversed the order so that we're starting with frame 43 and working our way back to frame 1. Let me blow that up full screen.
And Rick, does it matter in which order the images were captured, in which order the images are named, or in which order the images are inserted into the list?
The answer to all of those questions is no, it does not matter. If the images are shot in a random order, that's a problem, and you really don't want to do that. But as long as you shoot what the mathematician would call monotonically, from one end to the other, either front to back or back to front, either order is fine. And depending on exactly which optics you're using and exactly how you're choosing to step focus, it may be that the first frame is at the back or the first frame is at the front. Not to worry, all of the softwares will take care of that issue. You can force the order of processing if you want, but typically what people discover is that when they do that, all they do is expose a bunch more streaks on the edges. Okay, so that was Pmax, and you might have noticed that aside from setting the alignment control, which I didn't really need to do, there was no settings to make. DMAP is a little more complicated. There are DMAP settings. There are defaults for those settings, of course, but it turns out that the default settings for those assume that the images are what I'll call consumer quality. They're not extremely sharp down at 100% pixel views. And the images that Doug has shot are very sharp down at actual pixels. So I'm going to crank these radii down to a value that it turns out works better for the images that are coming off this camera and this illumination setup. That's a case where experience helps and where some time figuring out how to optimize the processing of the same setup will make it much more efficient to shoot multiple subjects. Let me now say align and stack all DMAP. So this is going to scurry through, accumulating a sort of a draft, a rough cut map of what is most visible where. And then it pops up this perhaps challenging to learn control. Set contrast threshold. This is the thing I was talking about earlier that allows you to provide a hint about where the image contains useful information to attempt preserving. This percentile that is shown, 30 percentile in this case, is the fraction of pixels that the software is going to ignore. The ideal setting is that that fraction of pixels corresponds to roughly the area where nothing is focused or there isn't any detail to focus on. So for this scene, where we have all that white plexiglass, we would crank that number up to something in this area. Generally, it's a good idea to have the entire subject or almost all of the subject appear in normal color, while the rest of the image goes, like the background here, what we call blacking preview. If we push this control even farther over, we're going to start ignoring more and more pixels. And now we're starting to see a banding pattern occur. This banding pattern is analogous to the focus mask that we saw in Capture 1. The sense of it is reversed. What is now highlighted here by being black are regions where the focus is bad. Regions where the focus is good are the ones that appear in natural color. So what we're seeing here is an artifact of my skipping 2 out of every 3 frames. I have regions of soft focus separating regions of good focus. This is done obviously for illustration purposes here. It can be a diagnostic if you're trying to figure out exactly how many frames you should set. You'll learn it. There's a tutorial called How to Use DMAP. Always a good idea to read that. So let me just light this
Rick,
off.
I just want to jump in and say that I did not know that that feature could be used diagnostically until you and I spoke, and it's a very valuable tool that I think is kind of hidden away in the functionality of sliding that further to the right than visually you'd normally use it for. In this case, obviously, it shows the gaps because we purposely omitted most of the shots and therefore have purposely not had enough overlap. And if we, in fact, had used all the images, there would have been no ability to illustrate that there were focus gaps in the set. So
exactly.
I just wanted to expound upon that and say what a great feature that allows to be able to examine the propensity for any overlap or not.
Well, thank you for that observation. This is one of these cases where I have to admit that use of that feature is an accident. The control was put in for purposes of control, but as a diagnostic indicator, it happens to be useful as well. So again, here what I've done is I've pulled in lower resolution images that would process fast for the sake of illustration. I have run a PMAX, I have run a DMAP. I'm going to switch gears at this point and haul out of the oven the already baked cake. This is a project that I did yesterday and saved as a project, and I have reopened it now so that I can show you a few more things that are most apparent at high magnification. First is I want to show you something about this occlusion issue. Let me zoom in here to 100% and fly to the back of the train. Where there is this detail that Doug was mentioning earlier. Now, let me fly in the source imagery so as to step focus and see what the camera actually caught. Here I'm focused in front of everything that appears in that view, and everything's fuzzy. I'm going to scroll down until I'm at the point where I'm exactly focused on the corner of the train car. The corner of the train car is great, and that black thing behind it is out of focus. As focus shifts back, the thing behind becomes more and more clear. But at the point where the thing behind is completely clear, there is this section of detail that is corrupted by the out of focus blur coming from that the stuff in front of it. That's the sort of thing I mentioned that unfortunately is captured by the camera as part of just the physics of light, and to generate a perfectly clean result would require sorting all that out, understanding what the three-dimensional structure of the subject is, and then treating it as a computer-generated imagery problem as opposed to an image processing problem to generate a perfectly clean view of that. What the software actually generates at this point is something very close to a clean view, but you'll notice there's a little bit of pink here that was inherited from this region, and a little bit of yellow that was inherited from there. And maybe in 5 or 10 years we'll figure out how to not do that. Let me switch for a moment also to the PMAX output. In this particular case, PMAX produced an output that I don't particularly like because it made too many changes in contrast and brightness. The geometry here is not really complicated enough to justify it, so the DMAP output is just a much better thing to use in this area. Okay, Doug, I think that's probably the key points of what I needed to demonstrate. So are we ready to switch back and do the wrap-up?
I think that's exactly right. So I will switch to me being the presenter. And I'm the presenter, and I'll start sharing my screen. And I want to remind everyone before we go on to the problems and solutions section that if you have questions during the webinar, we will be stopping for those in about 10 minutes, and we'll have time to answer everyone's questions as long as you get them to us before then. AAW@digitaltransitions.com. It's an amazingly awesome woman at digitaltransitions.com. AAW@digitaltransitions.com. So let's talk about some challenges and solutions. And I think one of these will really stand out to those of you who have done focus stacking in the past. The other two are pretty straightforward. So the first two are very straightforward: defect trails and edge streaks. Rick, can you step us through what is a defect trail and what causes it?
Sure. Defect trails normally result from either dust on the sensor or a hot pixel, where you end up with either a dark spot or a bright spot at the very same pixel position on the sensor in every frame. As we saw earlier, as you shoot the stack, generally the subject ends up moving across the frame as a result of magnification changes. The software reprocesses the images so that the subject lines up, but then that defect moved. The defect is small and has a sharp edge, and so the software thinks that is a piece of detail that needs to be retained. It ends up propagating it into the output in every position that it ever occupied.
So in this case, the best solution is definitely not to fix it after the fact. The solution is to not have it happen in the first place. Before you do, especially a many-frame image stack, before you even do the captures, check to see if you have any dust in the sensor. You can shoot a white piece of plexiglass out of focus. You can hold the plexiglass up in front of the lens, and if you see anything on the sensor, clean that before you begin the focus stacking process. You'll save yourself a lot of time afterwards.
Exactly.
If you do have this.
Sometimes I recommend to people. Sometimes people ask what to do about these, and I say, well, you can do something like batch removal of dust spots in, say, Lightroom by doing a cloning or a healing operation. I always say that with some regret because the original imagery has lost information, and you can't ever get that back. All of the, quote, removal, unquote, mean plugging in essentially false data at each pixel position. A lot of times it helps, but I strongly recommend what you just said, clean the sensor and keep it that way.
The next challenge over is edge streaks. Edge streaks are a result of inconsistent framing between the captures you're making to put into the software to stack them. This one on screen is an extremely exaggerated version of edge streaks. This would be what results when you do things completely wrong and force the software to do things wrong as well. But it helps to visually illustrate what we mean by edge streaks. It's the continuation of the tone that you find at the edge of the image outward to the edge of the final composite. And that happens, again, by inconsistent framing. If you're using a tripod and you're keeping your hands off the camera during the capture sequence, you should have very little, if any, edge streaking. That said, it does reinforce that while you certainly don't need a lot of room around the subject, it's not a bad idea to leave a little wiggle room around the edge. You certainly don't want the edge of the object to directly abut the edge of the frame. You want to leave yourself a little wiggle room, a little space, so that as it gets magnified, for instance, as we noticed with the train, the image gets out of focus, gets larger, magnification changes. You want to leave yourself a little wiggle room so that if you do have any minimal edge streaks, you can just simply crop them out. Now, the last item here is the most complicated, the most intense to discuss, and it is object self-occlusion. Occlusion meaning to block or to be in the way of. And object self-occlusion quite literally meaning that part of the object is blocking another part of the object when it's out of focus. The out of focus area is blocking the detail of some other part of the object. And here's an example of that and the retouch solution. And you notice Rick doing this with two other examples, the train and the flower. Here is one that's a little bit more magnified for you. The far left, you see the front bud. These are two flower buds. The front bud is in focus, and the out of focus area is basically not recognizable. You can't even see what's back there. When we focus back there, what we see is there's another bud, and look at the sort of hip coming up here and sort of the W-shaped detail that you can see some of, but which is partially occluded by the out-of-focus front bud. And that is how that one frame, even ignore focus stacking, ignore physics, ignore math, just look at how it looks when you focus directly on that rear bud. You still don't see it fully. You see it partly occluded by the out-of-focus area of the front bud. Well, the automatic focus stacking algorithms, the math itself, often do a poor job of recognizing exactly what is going on there, because this is lower contrast, this is higher contrast, this is low contrast again, because this is partly blocked. It might do something like this. And depending on which software, either Zerene or Helicon, and depending on which method and which settings, the type of error may vary. But generally speaking, no software on any setting handles this situation perfectly automatically. It is self-occluded. It requires some manual intervention. The good news is with a little bit of retouching, and that's not retouching in Photoshop, it's retouching within Zerene, you can get back an elegantly presented version of this area. It is clean, it is correctly identifying sort of edges, it's a good version of it. That said, retouching should be, like focus stacking itself, an item of last resort. If you have the option to change the stacking method and it solves it, in other words, in some situations, one of the stacking algorithms might do a good job and the other one does a horrible job, and simply by switching algorithms, you can solve the problem. If you can stop down further, instead of shooting at f8, shoot at 11 or 13, if that leads to satisfactory sharpness, and that means less total frames, and it means the out-of-focus area will be less out of focus and therefore occlude less of the background, if that can solve the problem, very good. And then finally, the one that people think of perhaps the least often, but it is the most comprehensive solution to this problem, stop it in its tracks by simply changing the angle at which you're shooting. So if you have an object in which you can simply shoot a little above, a little to the left, a little to the right, in order to avoid the object blocking another part of the object behind it, then do that. Again, assuming that creates an image that's otherwise aesthetically and efficacious in what you want it to do. If that's the full solution, do that first. If all of these options fail, then retouching in Zerene is an excellent option to get rid of the artifact. So a little selfless, shameless self-promotion. If you, in fact, are looking to make a purchase of Zerene, we have browbeat Rick into providing a discount for our clients through July 31st. This is not like Banana Republic. There's not a sale every week. Zerene is very uncommonly on sale and very uncommonly discounted. But as a result of partnering up for this webinar, 20% is being offered with the coupon code DTW1606. So please, if you are going to make that purchase, avail yourself of that code and save yourself some money. Another quick note before we come to the Q&A, Digital Transitions as an entity is hiring. We are very eager to hear from any of your friends, family, coworkers, et cetera. If you are interested in design, we're interested in you, or any of your friends or family that are interested in design, web, or social media. We are looking for someone to work in that capacity for us out of our New York office. All right, so one last reminder as to the email address to ask questions. This will be your final call to ask questions. We will be moving on to the questions we've received, and anything in AAW@digitaltransitions.com will be answered. So let's cover a couple questions. A few of these are from this morning's session, and a few of these are from questions we've received so far today in this session. The first is Mac or PC. We had a question this morning that since Rick was doing his demo on PC and I was doing it on Mac, what's the deal with that? And the answer is all the software we're talking about today, Zerene Stacker, Helicon Soft, Helicon Focus, Photoshop, and Capture One are all available both on Mac and PC. There are no limitations to either platform, at least in the context of these software and this process. Next question we got was on automated capture. Is automated capture a feature of the software or camera? In the case of the Phase 1 XF, it is a feature of the camera itself. So that means you can use focus stacking on the XF whether you are shooting tethered or untethered. And that is a really nice thing, especially for working out in the field for architecture, interior, landscape, that sort of thing. It's very helpful that you do not need a camera. Sorry, you definitely need a camera. You do not need a computer. You do not need to have a computer tethered to the camera. Next question, and Rick, I'll throw this over to you. talk to me a little bit about sharpening and noise reduction. Obviously, we're throwing JPEGs or TIFFs into your software or into Helicon, or in the case of Helicon, if you throw a raw file in there, it's converting it to a TIFF in the background sort of without notifying or making that part of the user process. So what sharpening or noise reduction settings are advantageous or deleterious to focus stacking?
Well, the focus stacking software is in the business of finding subject detail and preserving that while throwing away the great bulk of the pixels that contain out-of-focus information. So anything that you can do to improve its ability to identify real subject detail is to your benefit. Noise reduction is in the business of improving what some people call the signal-to-noise ratio. That is, a good noise reduction method will preserve sharp detail that's really present in the subject while pushing down or eliminating random pixel noise. That sort of noise reduction is a very good thing to do for the software because it improves the software's ability to make the proper decisions. Sharpening, again, if it's a properly smart sharpening method that can sharpen real subject detail without also enhancing random pixel noise, then sharpening is a good thing. The one thing you don't want to do is overdo either noise reduction or sharpening, because if you overdo it in the source images, it's also going to be overdone in the stack output, and there's no way to fix that. You just have to go back to the beginning to the original images and repeat the stacking process. So
let's talk about benchmarks for how do we know it's too much? In the case of noise reduction, what does it mean to do too much noise reduction in this context?
I generally use just a simple visual test. I look at it and allow the piece of my head that interprets images to make the decision. Excessive noise reduction usually results in what I call a plastic appearance. Imagine viewing real hair versus viewing the hair on a plastic model. The real hair has a certain level of fine detail that corresponds to the physical reality of the hair. The plastic model does not. If you turn up the noise reduction controls too far on any noise reduction software, you get that sort of plastic appearance, and it looks awful. Stop short of that.
And in the case of sharpening, the main indicator you've gone too far is that you see obvious halation or halos forming around detail. Is that correct?
Exactly. That is exactly correct.
Obvious halos are a definite no-no for pre-stacking images. But a little bit of sharpening can actually help make it more obvious what is detail and what is background. From that point of view, I think I want to just quickly grab one of these images, look in Capture One at something, and that is, in default in Capture One, the sharpening threshold is set to 1. That helps avoid sharpening noise in the background. But in a really low ISO image from a really good digital back, as in this ISO 50 shot from the IQ3 100 megapixel back, this is the lowest noise camera we've ever made. Even a threshold of 1 is a little bit overly aggressive. It's overly trying to avoid sharpening, to the point where something that actually does have some detail, like for instance the red of this paint, may not receive sharpening even though there actually is detail there. So lowering that sharpening threshold a little bit will bring forward some of that subtle detail that might otherwise not be sharpened. Likewise, the default noise reduction of 50 is very light, and it is scaled based on ISO. In other words, a setting of 50 at ISO 50 and a setting of 50 at ISO 800 do different things. But even with that, it may be advantageous for you to reduce or entirely eliminate the noise reduction, again, in the context of a short, low ISO, high quality capture from a really good camera. Something like a digital back at low ISO basically needs no noise reduction. And the fear of having too much noise reduction would be that detail in here, for instance, on this soft painted surface would be ignored, and the detail does not need, the noise does not need to be removed from the background or the soft areas, because in fact there are not noise or issues in these soft areas in a low ISO digital back file. So it is a great question. It's a great exemplifier of how both the equipment and the post-processing matter. And I think that answers pretty extensively the sharpening and noise reduction question. Anything to add to that, Rick?
I do not. Good coverage.
This is a great, very specific question, and this refers to the XF that we were demonstrating on. How do you slow down the sequence to allow strobe recycle? Let me turn my video camera on. This will take just a second, and I will show you exactly how you do that. So on the XF body, the capture mode is included in the actual focus stacking. So if I turn on under capture setup, if I change the vibration delay to be whatever I want the amount of delay to be, for instance, half a second or 1 second, it's probably enough to help the strobe recycle, but if I need to, I can make it 2 or 3 or 8 or 10 seconds. So here I'll go with a nice value of 2 seconds. No, let's go ahead and do 3, just to make it easy to count. And then very importantly, I'll turn vibration detect off. If I include vibration detect and there's no vibration, instead of doing the 3-second delay, it will just take a picture right away. That's the whole idea of vibration detection as opposed to just straight delay. By turning vibration detection off, I will now find that the camera waits that period of time, 3, 2, 1, capture, 3, 2, 1, capture. You also notice it puts the mirror up at the beginning of that 3-second period. So this is the way in which you can ensure there is enough time for the for the strobe to recycle. That's a great question. It is a little obscure. Again, the key is to disable vibration delay, but to have the vibration mode and the vibration mode time set accordingly. So vibration mode on, vibration delay set to what you want, but very, very importantly, vibration detection should be disabled. That's contrary to the normal use of vibration mode. Normal vibration mode would be used out in the field or in a still life scenario to take a single image and you want it to delay until the vibration ceases. That is not what we want to do here. We want to introduce a specific amount of delay. Next question down. Do you use F8 for everything? And the answer to that question is definitely not. Rick touched on this a little bit probably after the question was asked. But the answer to what aperture to use is to use the largest aperture number, which corresponds to the smallest physical opening of the aperture, which corresponds to the most depth of field per shot. You want to go to the most extreme depth of field you can get before you start to compromise sharpness beyond that which you consider unacceptable. So again, if you're shooting for a small print, for instance, you're shooting in a catalog environment and it's going to be physically printed 3 inches wide on a physical print, or if you're going for e-commerce and you're only going for an 800 pixel wide image on the web, you may accept a little bit of softness at 100%, and you may be able to use F16 or maybe even F22. If you are looking to make a very large print, you will likely find, depending on the camera you're using, the resolution you're using, and the subject matter you're shooting, that even F11 is too far. So I use F8 as a pretty good, if you don't know what to do, use F8. But if you do know what you're doing, if you do have time to find it out, basically shoot at every aperture and find out what the highest aperture number is you can use before you start to get too much softness that is unacceptable. That is going to reduce the number of shots. It's going to reduce the issue of object occlusion. It's going to make your life easier. The last question here that I received is it better to use TIFFs or DNGs? And before I answer that, I just want to put up the email address one more time, aaw@digitaltransitions.com. As if we don't have another question after this, we'll be ending. So is it better to use TIFFs or DNGs? And as Rick mentioned, the files that you put into the stacking software should already be TIFFs or JPEGs. In the case of Helicon, they allow you to drop in raw files such as DNGs or, dot, whatever the heck Canon is, CR2. But in that case, all you're doing is dropping in a raw file, which it is going to create a TIFF for you all. So really, I think you should be doing TIFFs yourself. If you're doing a high-quality output, they should be 16-bit TIFFs, and you should be processing them in your preferred software. We're obviously very biased, but we believe Capture One produces not just the most pleasing-looking images. In the case of cultural heritage imaging, it produces the most accurate colors. And in the case of detail extraction, I think it does the best job of getting detail out of the image. Oh, I see we do have more questions here. I have to answer them on the fly. Do you have a recommendation for a moving stage to use a camera that doesn't have built-in stacking capability. So the first answer to that question is, if you're shooting something that's not super small and you have the ability to change focus manually, I would experiment with that first. Not because moving the subject or moving the camera isn't an option, it certainly is, but because it is by far the more intuitive standard photographic method. So take and adjust the focus manually. If you have a good manual focus lens, you can put down literally a piece of gaff tape and mark with a Sharpie on the gaff tape the beginning and the end. Divide that up by 5 or 10 or 20 shots with little ticks, and then advance the focus manually as you go. Now, in the case that you do, in fact, want to have a stage, I will turn this over to Rick because he is by far and away not just an expert, but really one of the experts in this kind of photography. So if you are dealing with tiny, Rick, in a 1-minute format form, what would you suggest for some starter stages?
There is a device called a Stack Shot, which is made by Cognisys Incorporated. Stack Shot is an automated rail that has a precision down to approximately 2/1000 of a millimeter over a range of 4 inches, or for a few extra bucks you can get a longer rail that, yes, exactly, very good, Doug. You can get one that has an 8-inch travel. Normally I recommend to people that the short rail, the 4-inch travel, is just fine. The longer rail can be misused in ways that results in getting changes of perspective from front to back of your stack, and those changes can cause problems. There is actually a web page at the ZereneSystems.com site that addresses the question of ring versus rail, that is, focus ring, the method that Doug presented, versus rail, which includes as a subset the Stack Shot. And it would clarify when you might want to think about using the focus ring versus any rail of any sort. But this is a very cool device. Stack Shot is one of my favorite devices, and let me say I have no financial investment in that thing. I just love the product.
Very good. So that is, again, that is more applicable for smaller stuff. It's of zero value for focusing near infinity like landscape, architecture, interior. And generally speaking, when you're talking about something the size of your fist or larger, Rick, do you agree that while that can be employed, that changing the focus is the simpler, more intuitive method?
And you often produces a better result. So yes, size of your fist or better, focus by ring. Or if you do have a bellows system or a view camera and you can focus by changing the rear bellows extension, leaving the lens in exactly the same place, that's even better.
Very good. So I have no more questions. There was one more question that seems more suitable to answer offline, so we will follow up with you by email. So with that said, that is all. If you'd like to follow up, you can visit our websites at utdch.com, digitaltransitions.com, zerenesystems.com, and heliconsoft.com. Remember the discount code for Zerene, a rare opportunity to buy at a discount, is valid through July 31st. And we thank you all for attending. A video of this presentation will be available on our website in about a week. Thank you so much, and have a very nice day.
Thank you very much, Doug, for putting this together.